The folded napkin landed beside his plate like a bomb waiting to explode. Daniel Whitmore's fork stopped halfway to his mouth as he stared at the innocent-looking square of paper. The waitress, Sarah, her name tag read, had slipped it to him with shaking hands, her eyes darting toward the kitchen before she hurried away. No one else had seen it happen. But what Daniel read when he unfolded that napkin would turn his quiet Wednesday lunch into the fight of his life. 3 words scrawled in desperate handwriting. "They're stealing everything." Daniel's blood turned to ice. He wasn't just any customer sitting at table 7. He was the owner, the founder of Whitmore's Chop House. And his restaurant was under attack from the inside. What started as a routine undercover visit to check on a struggling location had just become something far more dangerous. Someone on his own staff was bleeding his business dry, and the waitress who'd risked everything to warn him might be the only person standing between him and total destruction. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because tomorrow at the same time we'll bring you another story of Black people leading the way that you won't want to miss. Daniel Whitmore hadn't built 17 restaurants by accident. He'd learned to read rooms, read people, read the small signs that told the real story behind the smiles and everything's fine reports. That's why he sat at table 7 in his own Fort Smith location, dressed like any other customer, watching his investment crumble. The worn denim and faded cap weren't a costume. They were armor. In places like this, small-town Arkansas, where old habits died hard, a successful Black businessman could make folks uncomfortable. But a quiet customer in working clothes, invisible. That's exactly what Daniel needed to be. The restaurant felt wrong. Not busy wrong or understaffed wrong. Something deeper. The servers moved differently, glancing toward the kitchen more than toward their tables. Conversations stopped when certain people walked by. The energy felt careful, controlled. Sarah approached his table with the kind of nervous energy that made Daniel's instincts prickle. Mid-30s, tired eyes, the forced smile of someone who'd been working double shifts for too long. She took his order: ribeye, medium rare, loaded baked potato, without really looking at him. "First time here?" she asked, her voice just a little too casual. "Yeah, heard good things," Daniel replied, keeping his voice neutral. He'd perfected this act over the years. The polite customer, interested but not too interested, friendly but not memorable. Sarah nodded, but her eyes kept flicking toward the kitchen. "Kitchen's a little backed up today. Might be 20 minutes or so." Daniel knew his kitchen specs by heart. 20 minutes for a ribeye meant something was seriously wrong. His restaurants prided themselves on 12-minute ticket times. He trained every kitchen manager personally on the systems that made it possible. "No problem," he said easily. "I'm not in a hurry." As Sarah walked away, Daniel's eyes followed her movement. She didn't head straight to the kitchen. Instead, she stopped at the server station, grabbed a pen, and started writing something on a napkin. Her shoulders were tense, her movements quick and nervous. The lunch crowd was thin, maybe 15 people scattered across the dining room. But Daniel noticed something else: 2 men in suits at the corner booth. Not eating, just watching. Not customers. They had the look of people who belonged here, who had business here. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened his restaurant management app. The Fort Smith location's numbers told a story that didn't match what he was seeing. Labor costs up 30%, food costs erratic, cash deposits inconsistent. But the place looked busy enough on paper. Someone was cooking the books. The question was who, and how deep did it go? When Sarah returned with his drink, her hands were shaking. She set the glass down carefully, then reached into her apron pocket. The napkin appeared beside his plate like she was simply clearing the table. "Enjoy your meal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And sir, be careful who you trust around here." She was gone before Daniel could respond, leaving him alone with the most dangerous piece of paper he'd ever touched. Daniel's hands remained steady as he unfolded the napkin, years of high-pressure business meetings keeping his expression neutral. But inside, his heart was racing. The handwriting was rushed, desperate. "They're stealing everything. Manager, par, kitchen staff, cash, inventory, payroll fraud. They know you're here. Get out. Now." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Kevin Morrison, his Fort Smith manager, had been with the company for 6 years. Daniel had personally promoted him, trusted him with $1 million operation. The kitchen staff were mostly locals he'd hired on Kevin's recommendation. Daniel forced himself to take a sip of his drink, maintaining the act while his mind raced. The two men in suits suddenly made sense. They weren't customers, they were lookouts. Someone had recognized him despite his disguise. But how? Daniel had been careful. He'd driven his personal truck, not the company car, paid cash for everything, kept his head down and his voice unremarkable. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to talk. Kitchen. 5 minutes. Come alone." Daniel's blood turned cold. Someone was playing a very dangerous game, and he was the target. But running wasn't an option. This was his restaurant, his livelihood, his legacy. 17 locations employed over 400 people. If one location was compromised, it could bring down everything he'd built. He looked around the dining room again, seeing it with new eyes. The nervous energy among the staff. The way certain servers avoided the kitchen. The tension that hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't just theft. It was a hostile takeover from the inside. Sarah passed by his table again, not looking at him directly but moving close enough for him to hear her whispered words. "They're watching the exits. Don't go to the kitchen." Daniel's decision crystallized. He'd built his business by taking calculated risks, by trusting his instincts when the numbers didn't add up. Right now, every instinct screamed that this was bigger than simple employee theft. This was organized, systematic, and dangerous. He stood up slowly, leaving money on the table for his untouched meal. As he moved toward the restroom, he noticed the two men in suits straightening up, their attention focused on him. But instead of continuing to the restroom, Daniel turned sharply and walked straight to the kitchen. The dining room chatter faded behind him. As he pushed through the swinging doors, the kitchen was too quiet for lunch service. Only 2 people were working the line. And they looked up in surprise when he entered. "Can I help you?" asked a young man. Daniel didn't recognize, his voice carrying a slight accent. "I'm looking for Kevin Morrison," Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority he'd kept hidden during lunch. The young man's eyes widened. "Mr. Morrison stepped out. But he'll be back real soon. You can wait in his office if you want." Daniel nodded, but he had no intention of waiting in Kevin's office. Instead, he started moving through the kitchen, looking for the answers that would determine whether his business survived the next hour. What he found in the walk-in cooler made his blood run cold, and he realized Sarah's warning had come too late. The walk-in cooler told the story Daniel had feared most. Inventory sheets taped to the walls showed numbers that didn't match his corporate system. Premium steaks, marked as received, but nowhere to be found. Cases of wine logged as delivered, but missing from the racks. Someone had been systematically stripping the restaurant bare, while maintaining the fiction of normal operations. Daniel pulled out his phone and started taking pictures, documenting everything. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't casual theft by a desperate employee. This was organized crime, structured and methodical. "Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel spun around. Kevin Morrison stood in the cooler doorway, his expression carefully neutral. But his eyes were calculating, measuring Daniel's position, his option. "Kevin." Daniel kept his voice steady, professional. "Interesting inventory system you're running here." Kevin stepped into the cooler, and Daniel heard the distinctive sound of the door's sealing shut behind him. The temperature suddenly felt much colder. "I was hoping we could talk privately," Kevin said, his tone shifting from the respectful manager Daniel remembered to something harder, more confident. "You see, Mr. Whitmore, your little undercover visit has created some complications." "Has it?" Daniel crossed his arms, refusing to show the fear building in his chest. "I'm just a customer checking on my investment." Kevin laughed, a sound without humor. "Your investment? See, that's where we have a problem. Some of us think this place has been underperforming for too long. Dead weight. Maybe it's time for new management." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just theft, it was a takeover. Someone wanted to drive the Fort Smith location into the ground, force Daniel to sell, then swoop in and buy it at a fraction of its value. "Who's behind this, Kevin?" Daniel asked quietly. "Does it matter? You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and honestly out of your depth. This is bigger than you think." Daniel heard movement outside the cooler, multiple footsteps, low voices. Kevin wasn't alone, and Daniel was trapped in a refrigerated box with limited options. "Here's what's gonna happen," Kevin continued. "You're gonna have an accident. Slipped on some spilled grease in the kitchen. Hit your head. Very tragic. Restaurant owner dies checking on his struggling location. The insurance payout will help ease the financial burden on your family." Daniel's mind raced. Sarah's warning echoed in his head. They knew he was here. But how long had they known? How long had they been planning this? "The waitress," Daniel said suddenly. "Sarah. She's not part of this." Kevin's smile turned cruel. "Sarah's a problem we'll deal with after we handle you. Can't have witnesses running around, can we?" That was the line Daniel couldn't let Kevin cross. Threatening him was business. Threatening innocent employees was war. "You made a mistake, Kevin," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What's that?" "You assumed I came here alone." Kevin's confidence wavered for just a moment, and Daniel saw his chance. But before he could move, the cooler door swung open, and Daniel found himself facing a situation that would test every lesson he'd learned in 30 years of business. The question was, how many people were willing to die for a restaurant? 3 men stood in the cooler doorway, blocking Daniel's only exit. He recognized one of them, Marcus, the kitchen manager he'd hired 2 years ago. The betrayal cut deep, but Daniel didn't have time for wounded feelings. He had seconds to act before this situation turned deadly. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of genuine regret. "I'm sorry it came to this." "No, you're not," Daniel replied, studying the positions of all 4 men. "You're sorry you got caught." The cooler was maybe 8 feet by 12 feet, lined with metal shelving and hanging meat. Not much room to maneuver, but Daniel had learned long ago that successful business meant making the most of whatever space you had. "Kevin's right about one thing," Marcus continued. "This place was bleeding money. We just found a way to make it bleed in our direction instead." "How long?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious despite the circumstances. 8 months, Kevin answered. "Started small. Skimming cash deposits, inflating food costs, paying phantom employees. But then we realized we could do better. Why steal from the restaurant when we could steal the restaurant?" Daniel nodded slowly. "The bad reviews? The health department complaints? The staffing problems? You were driving down the value systematically." "Smart man," said one of the other men, someone Daniel didn't recognize. "Too bad you're too smart for your own good." But Daniel had noticed something Kevin and his crew hadn't. Sarah hadn't just given him a warning, she'd given him time. And in that time, she'd been busy. Through the cooler's small window, Daniel could see into the kitchen. Sarah was there, along with 2 other servers, and they weren't alone. Arkansas State Police uniforms were visible moving through the dining room. "You know what your real mistake was?" Daniel asked, conversationally. "What's that?" Kevin asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "You assumed Sarah was just a scared waitress trying to warn a customer? But Sarah Martinez isn't just a waitress. She's a former Arkansas State Police detective working undercover for the Restaurant Association's Fraud Investigation Unit." The color drained from Kevin's face. "You're lying." "Am I? Check your phone. See if you can call your lookouts in the dining room." Kevin fumbled for his phone, and Daniel saw the exact moment the reality hit him. No signal. The restaurant was being jammed. Standard procedure for a coordinated takedown. "Here's what's gonna happen," Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority that had built a 17-restaurant empire. "You're gonna walk out of this cooler with your hands visible. You're gonna cooperate with the officers outside, and you're gonna hope that the prosecutor feels generous when they're calculating how many years you'll spend in federal prison." "Federal?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. "Wire fraud? Racketeering? Conspiracy?" "Yeah, federal. You boys didn't just steal from me, you stole from every vendor, every employee, every customer who got substandard service while you were stripping this place bare." The cooler door swung open fully, and Sarah appeared, no longer the nervous waitress but a confident law enforcement officer with her badge visible and her hand resting on her weapon. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, "Arkansas State Police. You're under arrest." But as Kevin raised his hands, Daniel saw something in his expression that made his blood run cold. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The arrest went smoothly. Too smoothly. As Kevin, Marcus and the other two men were led away in handcuffs, Daniel felt the familiar prickle of unfinished business. He'd learned to trust that feeling over 3 decades of building and protecting his empire. "Detective Martinez," Daniel said as the dining room cleared of customers and crime scene tape went up. "How long have you been investigating this?" Sarah pulled out a notebook, her demeanor completely transformed from the nervous waitress.
6 months.
"We got a tip from the Restaurant Association about unusual patterns in your Fort Smith location. Inventory discrepancies, labor cost anomalies, customer complaints that didn't match your other locations. What made you think it was organized crime instead of simple employee theft?" "The sophistication," Sarah replied. "This wasn't some line cook pocketing cash tips. Someone was running a full-scale operation, phantom employees, fake vendor invoices, coordinated bad reviews to drive down property values. The kind of operation that requires serious backing." Daniel felt the pieces clicking together, but the picture they formed was worse than he'd imagined. "You're saying someone wanted to buy this location specifically?" "We're saying someone wanted to buy all your locations," Sarah corrected. "Fort Smith was just the test case." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. "All of them?" "Mr. Whitmore, we've been tracking similar patterns at 3 other Whitmore's Chop House locations. Same tactics, same timeline. Someone's been systematically targeting your entire chain." Daniel sank into the nearest chair, his mind racing. 17 restaurants, 400 employees, millions in assets. Someone had been playing a long game, and he'd been completely blind to it. "Who?" he asked quietly. "That's what we're trying to determine. The money trail leads to a series of shell companies, but the real power behind this operation is still hidden. Kevin and his crew are small fish. The real target is whoever hired them." Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from his corporate office. "Emergency board meeting called. Investors concerned about Fort Smith situation. Need you back ASAP." Daniel stared at the message, understanding flooding through him. The timing wasn't coincidental. Someone had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. "Detective Martinez," he said slowly. "I think your investigation just became a lot more urgent." "Why?" "Because whoever's behind this isn't just trying to steal my restaurants. They're trying to steal my company. And they're about to make their move." Sarah's expression sharpened. "What do you need?" "I need to get to Tulsa. Tonight. And I need you to keep digging here. Because I have a feeling Kevin Morrison knows more than he's telling us." As if summoned by his words, Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID showed Kevin's name. "That's impossible," Sarah said, checking her watch. "He's in custody." Daniel answered the call, putting it on speaker. The voice that came through wasn't Kevin's. "Mr. Whitmore, you've been very busy today. Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching your career with great interest. You built something impressive, Daniel. Too bad you're about to lose it all." The line went dead, leaving Daniel and Sarah staring at each other in the sudden silence. "They're not done," Daniel said quietly. "No," Sarah agreed. "They're just getting started." The drive to Tulsa took 4 hours, but Daniel's mind was racing faster than his truck. By the time he reached his corporate headquarters, he'd made 17 phone calls, reviewed 6 months of financial reports, and identified the pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. Someone had been playing a game of corporate chess, and Daniel had been focused on the wrong pieces. The Whitmore's Chop House corporate office occupied the top floor of a downtown Tulsa building, offering a view of the Arkansas River that usually calmed Daniel's nerves. Tonight it felt like watching a storm approach. His CFO, Patricia Wells, was waiting in the conference room with 3 board members Daniel didn't recognize. That was the first red flag. In 30 years of business, Daniel had handpicked every person who'd ever sat at this table. "Daniel," Patricia said, her voice carrying a tone he'd never heard before. "We need to talk." "I'm sure we do." Daniel took his seat at the head of the table, the position he'd earned through 3 decades of building this company from nothing. "But first, I'd like to know who these gentlemen are." "Representatives of Meridian Capital," Patricia replied. "They've been reviewing our financial situation and have some concerns." Daniel's blood turned cold. Meridian Capital was a vulture investment firm. known for swooping in on struggling companies and stripping them for parts. The fact that they were here, in his conference room, without his knowledge or consent, meant someone had been planning this for months. Our financial situation is solid, Daniel said carefully. Yes, Fort Smith has been underperforming. But one location doesn't define a 17-restaurant chain. Actually, said the lead Meridian representative, a thin man with predatory eyes, our analysis shows systemic problems across multiple locations. Labor costs, inventory management, customer satisfaction scores. The Fort Smith situation appears to be symptomatic of larger operational failures. Daniel recognized the language, corporate speak, designed to justify a hostile takeover. But he also recognized something else. These men were too prepared, too confident. They'd been expecting this conversation. Patricia, Daniel said quietly, how long have you been working with Meridian? His CFO's silence was answer enough. I see. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind calculating options. So the Fort Smith operation, the systematic theft, the coordinated attack on my reputation, that was all designed to bring me to this moment, force me to sell to Meridian at a fraction of market value. The market value is what someone's willing to pay, the Meridian representative replied smoothly. And given your current situation, our offer is quite generous. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Martinez. Kevin talking. Says larger operation involves corporate executives. Get out now. But Daniel didn't move. He'd been building and protecting this company for 30 years. He wasn't about to hand it over to corporate raiders without a fight. Gentlemen, Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. I think there's been a misunderstanding. You seem to think I'm here to negotiate. I'm not. Mr. Whitmore, Patricia said, be reasonable. The company is in crisis. The board has lost confidence in your leadership. Meridian is offering you a way out with your dignity intact. My dignity? Daniel laughed. A sound without humor. Patricia, you helped orchestrate the theft of my own company. And you're talking about dignity? He stood up, his decision made. Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna tell me exactly who's behind this operation. You're gonna provide me with every document, every communication, every piece of evidence that shows how this conspiracy was planned and executed. And then you're gonna help me destroy the people who thought they could steal everything I've built. Or what? The Meridian representative asked. Daniel smiled. And for the first time in hours, he felt like himself again. Or I'm going to show you why you should never underestimate a man who spent 30 years fighting for everything he's got. The conference room fell silent, but Daniel could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, getting closer. The FBI arrived at Whitmore's Chop House corporate headquarters at 11:47 p.m. But Daniel was ready for them. He'd spent the last 3 hours turning his conference room into a war room, with Detective Martinez on speakerphone, his lawyer on video call, and a stack of evidence that would bring down the entire conspiracy. Patricia Wells had broken first. Faced with wire fraud charges and a federal investigation that could put her in prison for 20 years, she'd provided the roadmap to the entire operation. Meridian Capital hadn't just been planning to buy Whitmore's Chop House, they'd been systematically targeting successful minority-owned businesses across the Southeast, using the same tactics. It started 2 years ago, Patricia explained to the FBI agents, her voice barely above a whisper. Meridian approached me at a restaurant industry conference. They said they were interested in acquiring regional chains, but they needed inside information to determine fair market value. And you believe them? Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. They offered me a percentage of the acquisition price. Said it would be worth millions once the deal went through. I thought it was just business. Daniel shook his head. It was never just business. Patricia, it was targeted economic warfare. The FBI special agent in charge, Maria Santos, looked up from her notes. Mr. Whitmore, based on Detective Martinez's investigation and the evidence you've provided, we're looking at a conspiracy that involves at least 12 minority-owned businesses across 5 states. The financial impact runs into the hundreds of millions. How many people were affected? Daniel asked.
So far,
Over 2,000 employees, dozens of vendors, hundreds of investors. This wasn't just about stealing your restaurants. It was about destroying the economic foundation of entire communities. Daniel felt the weight of that responsibility. His 17 restaurants weren't just his legacy. They were the livelihoods of families, the economic anchors of their communities. The thought that someone had tried to destroy all of that for profit made his blood boil. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we dismantle the entire operation," Agent Santos replied. "Kevin Morrison has agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's provided us with detailed records of similar operations in other states. We expect to make arrests across the Southeast within the next 48 hours. And my restaurants? Your restaurants are safe. The assets that were stolen will be recovered. The employees who were involved in the theft will face charges, and Meridian Capital will be facing a federal investigation that will likely result in the company being dissolved." Daniel nodded, but he felt no satisfaction in the victory. Too many people had been hurt, too many lives disrupted. The real victory would come in rebuilding, in ensuring that this never happened again. "There's one more thing," Agent Santos added. "Detective Martinez has requested a meeting with you tomorrow. Apparently there's something else she needs to discuss." The next morning, Daniel met Sarah at the rebuilt Fort Smith location. The restaurant was buzzing with activity. Real activity this time, not the artificial energy of a criminal operation. New staff, honest staff, people who genuinely cared about serving good food and treating customers right. "You wanted to see me?" Daniel asked. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "There's something I didn't tell you yesterday. The Restaurant Association didn't just hire me to investigate your locations. They hired me to investigate you." Daniel felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "Someone filed a complaint, claiming that you were involved in the theft, that you were setting up your own employees to cover your tracks. They provided detailed financial records, convincing evidence that you were the mastermind behind the entire operation. And you believed them?" "For about a week," Sarah admitted, "until I realized that the evidence was too perfect, too convenient. Someone was trying very hard to make you look guilty." Daniel understood. They weren't just trying to steal my company. They were trying to destroy my reputation. Ensure that I could never recover even if I proved my innocence. Exactly. But they made one mistake. They assumed that everyone involved in the investigation would be as corrupt as they were. They didn't count on finding honest people who actually cared about the truth. Daniel looked around the restaurant, at the servers who were working honestly, at the customers who were genuinely enjoying their meals, at the community that had been preserved because a few people had been willing to risk everything to do the right thing. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Sarah replied. "This is just the beginning. There are more operations out there, more communities under attack. The question is, are you ready to help us stop them?" Daniel thought about the 17 restaurants he'd built, the 400 employees who depended on him, the communities that had supported him through 3 decades of growth. He thought about the legacy he wanted to leave, not just as a businessman, but as a man who'd fought for what was right. "Detective Martinez," he said, "I think it's time to go on the offensive." 6 months later, the Whitmore Foundation for Economic Justice had helped expose similar operations in 8 states, protecting over 100 minority-owned businesses and thousands of jobs. Daniel's restaurants were stronger than ever, built on a foundation of trust, transparency, and community support. But the victory had come at a cost that still haunted him in quiet moments. Patricia Wells had received 15 years in federal prison, her legal career destroyed, her family shattered. Daniel felt no satisfaction in her fate, only sadness for the woman who'd helped him build his empire before greed consumed her judgment. Kevin Morrison got 12 years, while Marcus and the others received sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. The Fort Smith location had been completely rebuilt, not just physically but culturally. With new management Daniel had personally vetted. The deeper investigation had revealed the true scope of Meridian Capital's operations. They'd targeted 47 minority-owned businesses across the Southeast, successfully destroying 18 of them before the FBI crackdown. The human cost was staggering. Over 3,000 jobs lost, dozens of families bankrupted, entire communities left economically devastated. But there had been unexpected allies in the fight. Restaurant associations across the country had rallied behind Daniel's cause, implementing new fraud detection protocols and early warning systems. Other business owners who'd survived similar attacks came forward, sharing their stories and helping investigators connect the dots. The Black business community, often fragmented by competition and geography, had found unity in the face of systematic economic warfare. Detective Sarah Martinez had become more than an investigator. She'd become a partner in the Foundation's work. Her law enforcement background and Daniel's business acumen made them a formidable team. They'd testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections against economic terrorism, and their work had led to new federal legislation targeting corporate raiders who used illegal tactics to acquire minority-owned businesses. The most profound change had been in Daniel himself. The man who'd once focused solely on profit margins and expansion now understood that true success meant protecting the entire ecosystem that allowed businesses like his to thrive. The Whitmore Foundation didn't just investigate fraud. It provided legal support, financial assistance, and mentorship to vulnerable businesses. On a cold February morning, Daniel stood in the rebuilt Fort Smith location, watching the morning prep crew work with the kind of focused energy that came from knowing their jobs were secure. The restaurant was busier than ever, supported by a community that had rallied around the story of the owner who'd fought back. Sarah joined him at the window, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thinking about that day?" she asked. "Every day," Daniel replied. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Someone else would have found the courage," Sarah said confidently. "That's what I've learned from this whole experience. There are more good people than bad ones. More honest folks than corrupt ones. The bad ones just make more noise." Daniel nodded, thinking about the employees who'd risked their jobs to provide evidence, the vendors who'd testified despite threats, the customers who'd supported the restaurants even during the darkest days of the investigation. The conspiracy had been elaborate and well-funded, but it had been defeated by ordinary people choosing to do the right thing. "You know what the real victory is?" Daniel asked. "What's that?" "It's not just that we stopped them, it's that we showed other people it could be done. Every business owner who reads our story, every employee who finds the courage to speak up, every community that refuses to let economic bullies win. That's the real legacy." Sarah smiled. "So what's next?" Daniel looked around the restaurant one more time. At the servers taking care of their customers, at the kitchen staff preparing honest meals, at the community that had chosen to support local business over corporate chains. He thought about the 17 locations across 5 states, the 400 employees who depended on him, and the thousands of people whose lives had been touched by this story. "Next," he said, "we keep fighting. Because somewhere out there, there's another business owner who's about to receive a warning they don't know how to handle. And when they do, they'll know they're not alone." Every day, he remembered the folded napkin that had started it all, and the brave woman who'd risked everything to slip him a warning. Sometimes, he thought, the most important messages come in the smallest packages. And sometimes, the most dangerous battles are fought over something as simple as a steak dinner and the truth about who you can trust.